I'll start with some last speakers. And as you know, languages are, even today, being killed faster than ever before in human history, and we may have only 5 to 10% of today's spoken languages left in 90 years' time, or maybe just 100 fully digitalized ones. That's also something people say. And maybe no sign languages with a lot of genetic manipulation and cochlear implants. Marie Smith-Jones, here you have her, and she was the last known speaker of EAC, died in 2008. We have Boa Senior, the last speaker of the Bo language, who died in January this year. And she was a speaker of one of the great Andamanese languages. And the Andamanese languages are supposed to be between 65,000 and 70,000 years old, meaning these people are descendants of one of the oldest human cultures on Earth, those who came directly from Africa. And Anvita Abbi, professor of linguistics at University of Delhi, has worked with the Andamanese languages for a very long time, and here she is with the last speaker. They became great friends during a long time. There's something here about both of them. And next, do parents choose to kill their mother tongues through not transmitting them to the children? So I'm asking, why are there no more any EAC speakers or Andamanese Bo speakers? Why did Marie and Boa not transmit their languages to their children? And why did Tore's parents, and Tore is the person talked about in the appendix, why did his parents not speak Sami to him? And why do most Canadian and Californian and Australian Indigenous parents not speak their languages to their children or their grandchildren? And why did they not do it 50 years ago or even 100 years ago? Isn't it up to parents to choose what language or languages to speak to their children and what languages their schools should be in? Obviously, the parents see that it is better for their children to learn the big dominant language, even at the cost of the mother tongue, right? The small languages have not been able to adapt to the modern world. Isn't that correct? They are useless on the labor market, and that must be why they are being left behind. They have had their lifespan, and they are giving space to more useful languages, so the parents are themselves voluntarily killing the languages. Isn't this correct? No, as all of you know. Do parents really choose to kill their mother tongues? And now I would like David and Joan to read this.
The problem isn't new to our generation.
I'm 66 years old.
Hopi stopped learning our language.
I wasn't allowed to speak my language.
When they were punished for speaking it in school.
You're afraid, you're ashamed, you're crying, and they tell you to stop crying and hit you. But how can you stop crying when they hit you?
That's what happened to my grandmother, Eloise Choyeteyampe. She stopped teaching for her children.
I regret it now.
To protect them from suffering the same humiliation that she had to endure when she was in school.
And today, Hopi teens worry about loss of culture. Thanks, my friends. But even those with good intentions get some things wrong. And this is from the same Hopi public radio thing. For nearly 1,000 years, the Hopi people have lived on the same 3 mesas, land now considered part of northeastern Arizona. For all that time, they have been speaking the Hopi language, which is slowly dying. There are many hurdles standing in the way of preserving Hopi, including for Hopi teens the choice between preserving their culture and adopting a modern lifestyle. And again, as usual, this is presented as either or, and it is not necessary. We need to think in terms of both and. So even those who have good intentions, like those who made this Hopi program, do get some things wrong. Trying to relearn Sami. In November last year, I was in the Sami country on the Norwegian side, in a village called Unjarga, a one-day seminar. I had several hours with a Sami man, my age, 70, who fetched me from the airport and drove me back again. His parents were Sami, and they spoke Sami to each other, but only Norwegian to the children, with exactly the same motivation as in the Hopi story, to help the children, to save them from being teased. He learned Sami anyway to some extent, but he's struggling now to learn more. He married a Norwegian woman who doesn't speak Sami, and Norwegian was the only language in their home. Now his children ask him why he did not speak Sami to them, and some of them blame him. He speaks Sami now to 4 of his grandchildren, but he cannot read or write Sami. He loves walking in the woods, hunting, fishing, but he knows very few names of plants or mushrooms in any language. He never learned them in Sami or in Norwegian, and we walked around and I could name most of the things he couldn't. He's learning new words now in Sami. He learned, for instance, swan, and there are lots of swans there, in Sami, only a couple of years ago. His grandchildren can have all or some of their schooling in Sami or study Sami as a subject. They can read Sami children's books, sometimes in both Sami and Norwegian, or Sami and Finnish. Torkel Rasmussen's fantastic book, Eigin Laura, for children and young adults, where a selected group of Sami children with several Sami mother tongues get initial shamanic training, is here in Sami, and I have it in Norwegian. Here it is, absolutely marvelous book. So there's a difference between generations. Even Norwegian-speaking children with completely Norwegian background can now study Sami as a subject in Unjarga. There are courses in Sami for adults at different levels, for beginners, and for those who can speak but not read and write. And I really tried to encourage my Sami friend to attend one, and he promised, and I'll check up on that. He was very proud of his Sami heritage. He told me about the Sami museum and Sami tradition, etc. Here you have 3 generations of Sami women. The youngest ones have had Sami medium education, 3 of them. The middle generation has had to relearn Sami as adults. And the third from right is Gauppe-Pira Jonna Ulla. That is her Sami name, Ulla Aikio-Puoskari, the Education and Information Secretary of the Sami Parliament in Finland, a very good friend of mine. I know all these people. But difference between the generations. The role of grandparents and different choices. I had dinner in the home of 2 old Sami. He was 86, she was 78. Both had been married earlier, but both spouses had died long ago. The man had spoken Sami to his children, very unusual then. One of them, the youngest of his children, was my hostess, principal of a Sami school. She speaks Sami only to her children, and her Norwegian husband has learned enough Sami to understand, and he approves completely. Of the old man's grandchildren, 5 do not speak any Sami. The others do to varying extent, and this daughter's children are the most fluent ones. But then, how about the old woman, 78 years? She had not spoken any Sami to her children, and now they are really blaming her. And when we had this dinner, she was telling about it. She was crying. And she said she, of course, thought that she was doing what was best for her children. She was trying to save them from the shame, and now she gets the blame. Most parents have no choice. For a choice to exist, firstly, alternatives need to exist. Mother tongue-based multilingual education does not exist today for most indigenous, tribal, or minority children. They have to accept dominant language medium education, like English medium here. Parents need to have solid research-based knowledge about the long-term consequences of their choices. Most parents don't have that and did not have that. And thirdly, parents need to know that all languages are fit for education, formal education, and that either or is a false ideology. It's a linguicist ideology. Children can learn both their own language and one or several dominant languages well, if the education is organized to make this possible. The United Nations 2004 Human Development Report linked cultural liberty to language rights and human development, and it argued that there is no more powerful means of encouraging individuals to assimilate to a dominant culture than having the economic, social, and political returns stacked against their mother tongue. Such assimilation is not freely chosen if the choice is between one's mother tongue and one's future. We often discuss this type of issues at seminars. There are so many stories out there, and many of them are extremely painful, as many of you know here. But as the old Hopi woman says, it's not too late. For several of the Sami languages, things have really changed, but it is a constant struggle. It's wonderful to see how much strength and knowledge there is now, and I could hear some of that already yesterday evening here. I have met people at seminars who attended seminars and lectures with me 40 years ago. We talk about how different it was then, with the assimilationist ideology penetrating everything. when they, after my seminars 40 years ago, had decided to speak Sami to their children. It was very unusual and very courageous. And now these people have multilingual grandchildren who know Sami very well. There is a lot of hope, and it's not too late. But historically, Indigenous and minority parents have not chosen for their children to learn the dominant languages at the cost of their mother tongues. The languages have disappeared as a result of linguistic genocide. And this linguistic genocide continues today in most of the world. And then I'm going to say a few words about this genocide. And this book, which is 818 pages, and people claim it's very easy to read, has lots and lots of examples. So it's called Linguistic Genocide in Education or Worldwide Diversity and Human Rights. One reason why linguistic human rights in education and maintenance of all the world's languages, mother tongues, are necessary is to counteract linguistic genocide and crimes against humanity in education. Many people think that the term genocide is too strong. And if we look at the UN International Convention on the Prevention and Punishment of the Crime of Genocide, 2 of the 5 definitions of genocide fit exactly the kind of education that a lot of Indigenous peoples have had and continue to have. Genocide is forcibly transferring children of the group to another group and causing serious bodily or mental harm to members of the group. I'll take just 2 examples. Pirjo Janulf's longitudinal study, and this is immigrant minorities. Of those Finnish immigrant minority members in Sweden who had had Swedish medium education, not one spoke any Finnish to their own children, regardless of whom they married. Even if they themselves might not have forgotten their Finnish completely, their children were certainly forcibly transferred to the majority group, at least linguistically. So assimilationist education is genocidal. An African example, Zambia and Malawi, 1,500 students, grades 1 to 7. The Zambian pupils had all education in English. And what Ed Williams says is large numbers of them have very weak or 0 reading competence in 2 languages. The Malawi children were taught in local languages, mainly mother tongues, during first 4 years with English as a subject, and then all in English. They had slightly better test results, even in the English language, than the Zambian students. In addition, they read and wrote their own languages. And Ed's conclusion, there's a clear risk that the policy of using English as a vehicular language may contribute to stunting rather than promoting academic and cognitive growth. And this also fits the UN genocide definition of causing mental harm. Canada, one report tells about Canadian Inuit students taught in English who are neither fluent nor literate in either language, and presents statistics showing that the students end up at only grade 4 level of achievement after 9 years of schooling, causing mental harm. And this is what has happened masses of times in this country. So the question is, can most Indigenous and minority education in the world be claimed to participate in committing linguistic and cultural genocide according to the genocide definitions in the UN Convention? Robert Dunbar, who's a human rights lawyer, and I have asked this question in several publications. And here you see Robert. He's going to be in a month research professor at the only Gaelic medium university in Scotland. One of our publications, and Ole Henrik Magga, who is the first author here, and we put, Ole Henrik was the first president of the UN Permanent Forum on Indigenous issues. So here's one of our expert reports. And this expert paper contains sociological and legal argumentation where we show that to educate Indigenous, tribal and minority children through a dominant language in a submersion or even early exit transitional program violates the human right to education, also legally. And this right is in many international human rights documents, also in the UN Convention on the Rights of the Child, and this convention has been ratified by all other UN member states except 2, Somalia and the United States. Subtractive dominant language medium education for these children prevents access to education because of the linguistic, pedagogical and psychological barriers that it creates. Thus, it violates the right to education. It often curtails the development of the children's capabilities, and therefore it perpetuates poverty. And we are using economics Nobel laureate Amartya Sen's theories about what poverty is all about. This education is organized against solid research evidence about how best to reach high levels of multilingualism and how to enable children to achieve academically in school. I have two studies that Steve Krashen talks about. This came in April, and they show that children in bilingual programs learn about as much English as do children in English-only programs. And in light of these findings, Stephen says it's clear that approving Proposition 227, which dismantled bilingual education in California, was a mistake. Our second expert paper, Forms of Education of Indigenous Children as Crimes Against Humanity. There we again considered the possibility that such subtractive educational policies implemented in the full knowledge of their devastating effects, and the states have known for at least 150 years in this country. Whether these educational policies may constitute international crimes, including genocide, within the meaning of the Genocide Convention. And that states persist in such policies, given this knowledge, can, we conclude, from an educational and sociological point of view, be described as a form of linguistic and cultural genocide. This education can cause serious physical and mental harm. It can have harmful consequences socially, psychologically, economically, politically. It can cause very serious mental harm, social dislocation, psychological, cognitive, linguistic, educational harm, and partially through this, also economic, social, and political marginalization. And also often very serious physical harm, for instance, in residential schools, and as a long-term result of marginalization. For instance, alcoholism, suicides, incest, violence. One example last night was I couldn't get a glass of wine, which I might have liked. That has to do with this kind of long-term issues, which last generations. Our paper contains legal argumentation which shows that forcibly educating the children in a dominant language, at least sociologically and educationally, is genocide. But we need some more court cases to ascertain the precise interpretations of some concepts in the Genocide Convention's definitions in order to see whether legally, with hard law, it can be seen as genocide, and whether we can start court cases against states where we demand compensation. In any case, this education can most probably be also legally labeled a crime against humanity. So that is what this country has been doing for many hundreds of years. Oh, did I go back? Yes. And I have the conclusion there, but you can read the conclusions. Our new book, which appeared 2 weeks ago, has a lot of this legal discussion, plus a lot of examples. So we describe what I have just said in much more detail than in these two expert papers for the UN Permanent Forum. Liane has a copy of that book, and let me see, did I have? No. If you go to my homepage, you can see where one can read it. It is freely available as an e-book, and it was published 2 weeks ago. Then linguistic human rights are necessary. And linguistic human rights in education are one necessary but not sufficient prerequisite in the struggle to prevent linguistic genocide and crimes against humanity. When all children attend school, and all don't, as you know, linguistic human rights in education are necessary for any group to reproduce itself as a group. And if people don't speak their old language, it is not likely that they are going for many generations to feel as part of that group anymore. They are necessary for maintaining linguistic and cultural diversity, and as a mediating factor, biodiversity, terra lingua, on Earth. And the most central linguistic human right in education is the right to mother tongue medium education in non-fee state schools. And these rights might be one way of not only preventing linguistic genocide, but promoting integration instead of segregation, and defending people against forced assimilation, promoting positive state policies towards minority languages, promoting the maintenance of the world's linguistic diversity, promoting conflict prevention, I could talk for days about that, and promoting self-determination for indigenous peoples. Historical physical violence continues. In many countries, states are still trying to kill languages through direct physical violence, which is often sanctioned by laws in the country, and Turkey is a very prominent example. And I hope that you remember that US is a great friend of Turkey, because Turkey is a NATO ally, and you think that you need them. Lockheed Martin weapons contracts. I mean, I could talk about all of these things for days, and I just have to mention them. Oil pipes through Turkey and so on. I have one reference here to a long article in the journal Genocide Studies and Prevention, where we talk about all of this. Rojda, she's performing at a festival in Diyarbakir in May 2009, and she got imprisonment 1 year, 8 months for performing a song in Kurdish at this art festival, because the court said it was propaganda for a terrorist organization. Some people in the audience displayed banners of the PKK, the Militant Kurdish Workers' Party, and Abdullah Öcalan. So she got 1 year and 8 months, 6 months of prison. No, 8 months, yes. And here she is again. 4 politicians are on trial for speaking Kurdish when they had electoral meetings, and there's more about that. And here are some Kurdish Peshmergas, freedom fighters, meaning the people from PKK. Here they are on Iraqi side of Kurdistan, where I was in March 2006. And here are Kurds celebrating Newroz, their New Year, on the same occasion. And if you do this on the Turkish side, a lot of people go to jail. And here are Kurdish women, 2 generations, also the same parties. The physical violence continues in Turkish Kurdistan, in Burma, for instance, the Karen, in Sri Lanka, in China, the Uyghurs, the Tibetans, and other countries. People are imprisoned, they are tortured, they are beaten up or killed for demanding simple, basic linguistic human rights. And in all these contexts, of course, also because they are demanding other human rights, but demanding the right to learn and maintain their languages and cultures in addition to learning or the official language, a central demand for all groups, is seen as a crime. Most indigenous, tribal and minority parents of course want their children to learn the power language in the country, for instance English here. It is needed for good or often any jobs, and for democratic or even undemocratic participation in society. Most of them also want their children to learn their mother tongues. For instance, in an article about Tibetan Chinese bilingual education, a study revealed that most bilingual speakers are emotionally attached to their native language and have a strong desire to maintain it. While holding this attitude towards their native language, they rationally accept also the social and economic significance of Chinese. They firmly reject the idea to replace Tibetan with Chinese. And here are some Tibetan children in Tibet whose parents reject the idea of them not having the Tibetan language. Also in another study, Tibetans were asked, if Tibetan is completely abolished and only Chinese is allowed in teaching, how will you feel? There were 2 alternatives, and it is good to students, gets almost 11% of the replies, and it is hurting, gets 89%. And this last figure might be even higher if the researchers were Tibetan themselves. They were Chinese. And here are still more of these Tibetan children. And as you can see, there are Chinese heroes and Chinese writing on the walls. Why physical violence? What are the reasons for this physical violence? It has been, and it is very clear to power holders what the aim of the physical violence is: to maintain unjust divisions of power and resources locally and globally. It was equally clear for Winston Churchill in 1914 and George Kennan in 1948 as it is to today's power holders. Nothing new about it. Here's Churchill, 1914. He told his British cabinet colleagues, "We have engrossed to ourselves an altogether disproportionate share of the wealth and traffic of the world. We've got all we want in territory, and our claim to be left in the unmolested enjoyment of vast and splendid possessions, mainly acquired by violence, largely maintained by force, often seems less reasonable to others than to us." And guidelines for US foreign policy from 1948. George Kennan was the main US negotiator in Bretton Woods, and a direct line to World Bank and IMF and GATT and WTO. He said about the United States, "We have 50% of the world's wealth, but only 6.3% of its population. In this situation, our real job in the coming period is to devise a pattern of relationships which permit us to maintain this position of disparity. To do so, we have to dispense with all sentimentality. We should cease thinking about human rights, the raising of living standards, and democratization." And I have to have a PS. Kennan changed some of his views later, but this is what he said. "Today, structural and ideological violence accomplish what physical violence alone cannot do. So in addition to physical violence, and sometimes instead of it, there is structural and ideological violence. And in terms of linguistic human rights, in addition to physical genocide, there is linguistic and cultural genocide. Structurally, for instance, organize schools so that indigenous, tribal, and minority mother tongues are excluded. Very simple. That's structural violence. Ideologically, stigmatize these languages and cultures, glorify the power languages, and rationalize their relationship. Either or, instead of both and. We are helping them, and they want it for their own good. They benefit. This is what we claim. I'll take one example, the Uyghurs. And they are seen officially as part of China. And there is a combination of structural, ideological, and physical violence in killing the language. And they have stopped using the Uyghur language as the medium of education from kindergarten to university. They create residential schools everywhere and far away from home and move the Uyghur students to those schools. They send Uyghur middle and high school students to schools in the inner Chinese proper, Han Chinese regions, thousands of kilometers away from the Uyghur homeland. Think of what happened in this country not very long ago, exactly the same things. And Uyghur teachers are removed, and monolingual Chinese teachers come there instead, even in kindergarten and daycare. They don't know a word of Uyghur. And Uyghur teachers are fired for peaceful opposition and for wanting to promote the Uyghur language. I would have had Uyghur pictures here, but there is something that has happened to my best Uyghur friend, and he doesn't answer emails, and I'm very afraid that something might have happened for what he has been saying and doing. We take Singapore. Mandarin is a developing language. On the other hand, dialect, and dialects are all the other Chinese languages which are called dialects. Dialect is a stagnant language. So glorification and stigmatization, which is ideological violence. Unlike Mandarin, which has cultural value and will also have economic value, dialects have no economic value in Singapore. Absolute rubbish. Their cultural value is also very low. Dialect will hinder the learning of the child if he uses dialect. To speak dialect with your child is to ruin his future. To speak Hopi to your child is to ruin his future. Some school children from Singapore. And then we could compare the United States and Turkey. Here's Theodore Roosevelt, and I hope you appreciate the picture of young Roosevelt. It's very symbolic. He said this or wrote this in 1919. So everybody who comes here and in good faith becomes an American and assimilates himself to us, he should be treated on an exact equality with everyone else. For it's an outrage to discriminate against any such man because of creed or birthplace or origin, and he could have added language. But this is predicated upon the person's becoming in every facet an American and nothing but an American. There can be no divided allegiance here. Any man who says he's an American but something else also isn't an American at all. We have room for but one flag, the American flag. We have room for but one language here, and that is the English language, and so on. Now again, why does US support Kurdish genocide in Turkey? Arms industry benefits, oil pipes, secure Turkish support in restructuring the Middle East. The Turkish ideologies today of genocide vis-à-vis the Kurds fit old USA physical genocide, physically genocidal indigenous peoples, and culturally and linguistically genocidal assimilationist immigrant policies anyway. So if we change immigrant to Kurdish, American to Turkish, and English to Turkish, in the Roosevelt quote, we have the present-day Turkish ideology since 1923, and it continues today, as you could see of some of my examples. And here are a few quotes from Turkey. I won't read these quotes, read them later, and you can see that they even claim that the Kurdish language does not exist, and Kurdish is Indo-European, Turkish is not. They are almost as far apart as Chinese and English, and still Turks claim that Kurdish is a Turkish dialect. So, a quote from Pierre Bourdieu: globalization is a pseudo-concept that incarnates the most accomplished form of the imperialism of the universal, which consists of one society, the USA, universalizing its own particularity covertly as a universal model. So the US genocidal policies are spreading all over the world, and the US is paying a lot in order to maintain it. Here's a Danish comment. When the last speaker, Bo, died in March 2010, there was this comment in Denmark, and I have translated it. What's the problem if the whole of humanity speaks just one language, English? It's no problem at all, only nostalgic longing for something once upon a time that once existed. Just like the blue whales, they were interesting and impressive, but they simply could not manage the hectic and stressful life in a modern industrial society. So all of us here in this room, we are just nostalgic and doing something that is not modern. Good that we know, according to this Danish commentator. Kurds, Uyghurs, and Tibetans, and others mentioned, want the children to learn both their mother tongues, Kurdish, Uyghur, Tibetan, and the dominant language in the country, Turkish or Chinese. And this would be perfectly possible if schools did not participate in linguistic genocide. Then subtractive education is out, and mother tongue-based multilingual education is in. The most important pedagogical reason for both languages disappearing and for so-called illiteracy, meaning oracy, in the world is the wrong medium of teaching. Indigenous and minority children and children from dominated groups, for instance in Africa, even if they are not indigenous or minority, are taught in dominant languages subtractively, and they have very few linguistic human rights. Subtractive teaching in many cases, in most cases, show poor results in terms of both content and language learning, and it can kill languages in a few generations. Those who manage in subtractive teaching manage not because of the way their education is organized, but despite it. On the other hand, mother tongue-based multilingual education shows very good results, and we have enough knowledge about how MLE can be organized, and still it's not done on a large scale, and especially not in this country. This book, which is edited by Ofelia Garcia and myself and Maria Torres Guzman, has articles from all over the world on how multilingual education has been and can be organized. There's something about late exit transition, Tibetan Chinese, and I'll jump over these. The ultimate aim, I mean, they talk about CALP type things and so on, but still they say that the ultimate aim of Tibetan Chinese bilingual education is academic language proficiency in thinking and expressing thoughts in Chinese, not in Uyghur, not in Tibetan, and so on. The two studies mentioned earlier, which Steve Krashen had, represent weak forms of bilingual education. They exited the children to English only very early, by grade 3. And if we look at Thomas and Collier, which all of you know, they say that the strongest predictor of L2 student achievement is the amount of formal L1 schooling. The more L1 grade level schooling, the higher L2 achievement. There are very few quantitative studies of late exit, grades 5, 6, and even fewer of very late exit programs. But there are many small and some large programs. Kathleen Höök, born in South Africa, now in Australia, has done a really good summary of most African studies. And what she says is early transition to the international language of wider communication, meaning in most cases English, in Africa is accompanied by poor literacy in L1 and L2, poor numeracy, mathematics and science, high failure and dropout rates, meaning push-out rates. Children don't drop out, they are pushed out by the way the school is organized, and high costs, wastage of expenditure. Burkina Faso, and I think I'll jump over Burkina Faso completely, but what they have is exactly the same excuses that are used all over the world for why one cannot organize mother tongue-based multilingual education, and especially for small groups, and why it is so expensive, and so on. And what they show now, when kids have had 5 years of mother tongue-based multilingual education, this is similar to many other countries. Using the mother tongue facilitates the learning of the various subjects, including French, the official language. Parental participation is enhanced by the multilingual policy. Multilingual education is implementable, sustainable, affordable, and not more costly than monolingual education in a foreign language, French. Examples of maintenance and revitalization. Strong models for both Indigenous, tribal and minority children and dominant group children. And I'm going to concentrate on the last one, revitalization immersion programs for language dispossessed Indigenous peoples. Except for this one, Ethiopia. Ethiopia, which is one of the poorest countries in the world, poorest in Africa, they have an innovative and progressive national education policy, which is based on 8 years of mother tongue medium education. Regions have the authority to make their own decentralized implementation plans, and some regions transfer to English medium already after 4 or 6 years. And there is very surprisingly an efficient collection of system-wide assessment data, meaning the whole country. And a study across all the regions was commissioned by the education minister, and the data show very clear patterns of learner achievement. They show, the grade 8 data show that those learners who have had 8 years of mother tongue medium education plus English as a subject perform better across the curriculum, including in English, better than those with 6 years or 4 years of mother tongue medium education. And the exception is the capital, where children hear and use English outside school and get slightly better results in English than rural children, despite fewer years of mother tongue medium education. But this is, as far as I know, the only study which is the whole country and which compares how many years of mother tongue medium education children have had. And the results are extremely clear. The data have been analyzed and updated in several articles by the original authors and put in a global context by the editors in our book in press. This is a book that we are going to read the proofs for in 2 weeks' time. Multilingual education works from the periphery to the center. And you can see the list of contents if you go to my homepage. Some other examples of changes from poor to good practices, or examples of good practices where the poor practices hadn't been there. And there are many, many more. Kurdish woman has never attended school of any kind or had any teaching in or through Kurdish in Iraq, in Saddam Hussein's Iraq and earlier. These women, and look at the ages, have never had any teaching in Kurdish or through the medium of Kurdish. This is the ex-Minister of Education in Kurdistan, and I interviewed him in 2006. His brother is a very good friend of mine, and we had wonderful dinners and so on. He said, every child in the world has the right to education through the medium of their mother tongue, and Iraq is trying to do this. These Kurdish children, and that's the age group, have Kurdish as a teaching language in Iraqi Kurdistan today. Nothing in Turkey, but in Iraqi Kurdistan. And so do these boys. Scottish Gaelic, and I'll have a few examples. Grandparents, expectant parents, prospective parents, parents with babies, relations, friends, and so on. This is just an ad for a taster. They can come for one day and see how one can learn Scottish Gaelic so fast that even if one is expecting a child, one should be able to speak Scottish Gaelic to that child when the baby is born. And I'm not going to say anything more about this one either, but there is a lot on the net and so on. And you can read everything here. There's a family language action plan, the parents' handbook, and I have something from the introduction here and the contents of that, but you can read all of that. And there are some other examples of positive programs. Some are so far early exit, but they are developing. And I'll say a few things about some of them. I have already mentioned Ethiopia and Burkina Faso. I won't say anything about Finland, ask me later, but something about the others. Nepal. And the latest news this month, an MLE society, meaning multilingual, mother tongue-based education society, was registered to implement MLE throughout Nepal. And Nepal has more than 100 languages. And they say, we are working to support detailed MLE plans and programs. And new MLE implementation guidelines were also approved by the Ministry of Education in April this year. So this is wonderful news, absolutely wonderful. We've had a project there, multilingual education program for all non-Nepali speaking students at primary schools, and Lavadeo Avasti from the Ministry of Education, who is the director of this, is one of my old PhD students, has lived very much on our farm when he did his PhD studies, so he knows everything about cutting down trees and running after sheep and so on. And Amrit Yonyan Tamang was the Nepali counterpart in this project. We were running 7 pilot projects where Indigenous and minority children are being taught mainly in their mother tongues in primary schools. Materials and curriculum are bottom-up, largely planned by the villagers, nothing with Sesame Street or anything. And the plan is to extend this to all non-Nepali mother tongue children in Nepal. Here you have children listening to a story told by the village elder in a Rai language, and here the children are producing their own learning materials in Ranataru language, and the materials are based on a story by the village elder who is sitting there and helping them if they need help. And as you can see, all the other kids are outside the classroom, and they would like to do this too, but they were very interested in the filming too. Orissa, India. If you look at the dropout rates, and look at the lowest line there, 2004, 2005, before the project started. Overall, 49.2% of the children dropped out before finishing the elementary level. But if you look at the tribal children who are in the middle, almost 70% of them dropped out before finishing the elementary school. And the gap between those who are not tribal, meaning indigenous, and those who are is 22%. So this was the situation. And in 2007, a project started. In 200 schools, indigenous children from 10 language groups are being taught through the medium of their mother tongues in the first grades. And the coordinator is Mahendra Kumar Mishra. 16 more languages were added in 2008, several more were added in 2009, and I had an email from Mahendra 2 or 3 days ago where they were just preparing the 4th grade materials, and they are planning to go up to grade 6 now. It has been a real struggle. They are adding 20 more languages in August. And the research project From Mother Tongue to Other Tongue, Facilitating Transition in Multilingual Education of Tribal Children in India follows some of the children. And what they are trying to do is to really see to it that the children can get from everyday knowledge to CALP-type things and abstract thinking in the school. And teachers need a lot of training for that. There's adult education, teacher training, materials development, and so on. All of this is part of the program. And here too, the materials are produced by the children and the teachers and the parents and the elders. There are similar projects on a smaller scale in a couple of other states, Andhra Pradesh, for instance, and several other states are starting them, and there's a strong indigenous movement. And here you have some of the programs for adults, women and men learning how to read, community participation program. Here you have some tests. They are doing a lot of the kind of testing that the research project needs. And as you can see, the kids, all the other kids are sitting around there, but some are preparing, and then there's one child in the middle being tested, and the kids love the testing. They also have group evaluation, and as you can see, they look pretty happy. So it's not anything like the kind of testing that you have here, luckily. There's a new National Multilingual Education Resource Consortium directed by the professors Ajit Mohanty and Minati Panda, and do go to their website. It's just marvelous. And there's a lot here about what they are, what their aims are, what they are working with. Here they are, the two directors. And the specific objectives of the center are here: information, consultative help and guidance, troubleshooting, resource support, also working with people abroad, long-term research projects, evaluation, modify non-effective weak practices, and so on. Facilitate coordination, networking, technical support, policy advocacy. And they are doing a lot of that at all levels of locally and federal government, piloting models, and so on. Go and have a look. Arizona, I won't say anything. I'll just show two of Terry McCarthy's pictures, Navajo and English Rough Rock, another picture of the Navajo students. And Terry has several articles in several of the books that I have been co-editing lately. Sapmi, the Sami country. And they are the only indigenous peoples in the European Union, in Norway, Sweden, Finland, and Russia, between 70,000 and 120,000, and 10 Sami languages. And you saw in these several generations of women, they were Sami women. In the core Sami administrative areas in both Norway and Finland, indigenous Sami children had the right to have their first 9 years of education through the medium of Sami. They learn Norwegian and Finnish as a second language, and English and other languages as foreign languages. But they are mostly children who do know Sami. There are some Sami medium upper secondary schools, and there's a Sami medium university college. And the results are excellent linguistically, academically, in terms of identities. Youth culture. Sombi is a Sami, because that's obviously important if we want children and youth to be interested in these languages. Sombi is a Sami rock band, and the only thing I'll say is that they won the Liet International, an international song contest for minority languages in Europe. They won it in October last year. And if you look at these young kids, and I know everybody's parents, they come from Vuotso, a village where I have been very much, and where my Sami goddaughter comes from that village. Ulaike Puoskari comes from there. I mean, they look so young and innocent. You should hear their rock. I mean, one can't recognize them. Anar Sami, and there are some 350 probably, speakers of Anar Sami. And there is a wonderful rapper. I didn't succeed to get a good picture of him, so there's no picture, and I won't say much about him. But yeah. And his rap is listened to by a lot of people. I mean, he's very, very popular in all Nordic countries and outside. And people don't understand a word because there are just 350 speakers. But they think that he's fantastic. He said, when I went to school, I was the only child in my age group who spoke Anar Sami, he explains. And in that Hopi example, there was a boy who was the only one who spoke Hopi at home. And only a few years ago, no Sami children under the age of 7 could speak Inarisami, Anar Sami. Now a lot of them can. He says if he becomes a father, he will definitely speak Anar Sami to his children and carry on the ancient culture to the next generation. And yes, no more about that. But about the Anar Sami revitalization. So some 350 speakers, many of them old, plus children who have been in a Sami language nest. There's an urgent need of speakers, especially teachers, translators, daycare staff for language nests, youth workers, media specialists. And they started in August last year a 1-year training with 18 participants, cooperation between the university and lots of other things. The goal is that all participants learn Anar Sami so well in 1 year, orally and in writing, that they can use it in their work. And Lian's master apprenticeship program is used. The leader of this program is Maria-Lisa Olthus, and she's the only person in the world who has written a doctoral dissertation in Anar Sami. Jessie might feel very comfortable with that. Annika Passanen is the contact person, and she was the one who wrote the long story about Tove in the appendix, which you have had. Her mother tongue is Finnish, but she's fluent in both Anar Sami and North Sami, and her 2 children are in the Anar Sami language nest. Here's Annika with the oldest child. And here is Maria-Lisa Olthus, the director of this program. And this is from a private letter that she wrote to me, and I translated it. And she says, I have been thinking with great warmth of the recommendation that you wrote. I wrote a recommendation saying the Finnish state has to be ashamed of itself if they don't give them this grant. And I will certainly tell everybody internationally what a shame it is for my country, Finland, if they don't get this grant. But I also had lots of proper arguments, and they got a very big grant. Now the results have started coming, she says. Our students have been in intensive Anar Sami training for 4 months, and they are all speaking Anar Sami. The passive speakers, the ones who had heard it in their childhood but didn't speak, got their mouths open already in 2 weeks. Now we also have our first experiences of a master apprenticeship program. Sorry, Lian, you have seen all of this earlier, which has been realized in a structured way. The language masters took their work really seriously and were very proud of their linguistic and cultural skills. They were happy that they were the ones who were able to do something concrete for a brighter future for their own language. The students were satisfied with a different way of learning, and especially with the fact that they also heard another type of speech in addition to what their teachers used in class. The Anar Sami remained the language of communication everywhere in a fantastic way, and everybody thought that the timing going to the masters at this point was good. I'll try to publish something about this when the program finishes. And then she has lots of concrete examples of what each of these people did with their masters. But I think that I will have also to jump over this so that I am not taking too much of anybody else's time. So please go and read all of this. Here are language immersion children listening to a lecture by me in Anar Sami. So kids were listening to a lecture at a bit higher level of abstraction than this, and they asked very sensible questions. And here's more about them. The Anar Sami did not have almost any materials. So an Anar Sami children's delegation went to the Finnish president to demand more mother tongue medium materials. Here they are in front of the Finnish Parliament on the way to meet the President, Tarja Halonen. And here, as you can see, the President is somewhere on the left with the reddish hair. She's talking to the children really properly and asking questions and so on, and they are going to get more materials. Many of the experiments and programs that I mentioned are described in this book, published in India by Orient Black Swan, and it's also published in Britain. And the 4 editors, meaning Ajit Mohanty and Minati Panda and my husband Robert Philipson and me, we are here sitting, working, busily finishing the editing of the book. So here it is in the British version, which is almost the same. Biodiversity, linguistic diversity, and very few words. Linguistic diversity and biodiversity are correlationally and very probably also causally related. Knowledge about how to maintain biodiversity is encoded in small languages. Through killing them, we kill the prerequisites for maintaining biodiversity. Most of the world's megabiodiversity is in areas under the management or guardianship of indigenous peoples. Most of the world's linguistic diversity resides in the small languages of indigenous peoples. Much of the detailed knowledge of how to maintain biodiversity is encoded in the languages of indigenous peoples. And if we continue as now, most of the world's indigenous languages will be gone by 2100. And this booklet discusses the relationship between biodiversity and linguistic diversity. It's available both on TerraLingua's website and at UNESCO. Here are my two co-authors to that book, David Harmon and Louisa Maffei. Colin Baker. In the language of ecology, the strongest ecosystems are those that are the most diverse. That is, diversity is directly related to stability. Variety is important for long-term survival. Our success on this planet has been due to an ability to adapt to different kinds of environment over thousands of years, atmospheric as well as cultural. And thinking of climate changes and everything now, that is something where we have to adapt. How are we going to do it? Such ability is born out of diversity. Thus, language and cultural diversity maximizes chances of human success and adaptability. So, bicultural diversity is essential for long-term planetary survival because it enhances creativity and adaptability and thus stability. And today we are killing biocultural, biolinguistic diversity faster than ever before. Vandana Shiva says, ecological multiples are insurance. In any crisis, uniformity is the worst way to respond. Diversity is resilience. Concluding remarks, education is the most crucial input in fighting poverty. What is the most critical and cost-effective input to change the conditions of poverty, or rather, in Amartya Sen's sense, to expand human capabilities? There's a general consensus among the economists, psychologists, and other social scientists that education is perhaps the most crucial input. The advantages of commanding English will tend to diminish when these competencies become more and more abundant. There's a lot of research about this already. And here we have the summary of what subtractive dominant language medium does. And you can read the summing up because you have heard all of it. And I'm just then saying, if this scenario with killing languages the way we do, if it is not counteracted strongly and immediately, the estimate could also be that most languages to go would be indigenous, and most of the world's indigenous languages would no longer be learned by children in 2100 or be completely extinct. And since much of the knowledge about how to maintain the world's biodiversity is encoded in these small indigenous and local languages, with the disappearance of the languages, this knowledge, which is very often more accurate, more sophisticated than Western so-called scientific knowledge, will also disappear, and this means destroying many of the prerequisites for human life on Earth. Is this what we want? So I've shown some positive examples, and they are taking place. Still, in today's situation, there's a lot of nice talk and far too little action. Most countries are hypocritical, and this certainly includes this country. When states, including the ones who voted against the United Nations Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples, meaning the 4 countries, Australia, Canada, Aotearoa and USA, refused to grant Indigenous peoples and both national and immigrated minorities an unconditional right to the most decisive linguistic human right in education, the right to be educated in one's own language in a non-free state school. They are seriously harming not only the children concerned and themselves, but also themselves and our planet. Australia and Aotearoa have changed their minds a bit. Canada and US have not much. So states follow emotional common sense and harm the children and themselves for short-sighted and wrong political reasons. And rationality, Diana Ackerman says, we are among the rarest of the rare, not because of our numbers, but because of the unlikeliness of our being here at all, the pace of our evolution, our powerful grip on the whole planet, and the precariousness of our future. We are evolutionary whiz kids who are better able to transform the world than to understand them. Other animals cannot evolve fast enough to cope with us. It's possible that we may also become extinct. And since 1997, when she wrote this, the possibility is still much, much greater. And if we do, we will not be the only species that sabotaged itself, merely the only one that could have prevented it. And last, it's not too late. I just wish that people around the world could share their stories, and I have shared some stories with you, so that the false belief in linguistic assimilation as a panacea would be finally exposed, and people who still have their languages and bring up their children with those languages would not need to go through everything that other Indigenous peoples have suffered. In lots of places in Asia and Africa, the Indigenous languages are still being learned by children, but the regional, national, international language lobbies are incredibly strong, and they are still spreading the false either-or messages instead of both and. Many Indigenous people still transmit their languages to their children so that they learn the parents' mother tongues as their first languages and identify with them. Sometimes they also know these languages best, and in some cases even use them most, even if many of them are multilingual, some even from the birth. So if you look at this criteria, definitions of mother tongue, the language learned first, the language one identifies with. This is still something that happens with many Indigenous peoples around the world. But the subtractive language medium education leads to a situation where the languages are no longer transmitted. In the best case, what is left is an identification with the ancestral mother tongue and a wish to learn it, and a need for revitalization or even revival of the languages. This is a gross violation of human rights. As you can see, the blue is the only one that many have left, including many in this country. So, this is my last slide. Do we need to kill languages, cause insufferable pain and harm to several generations, and then start rescue work, which is what you are doing? Are we humans really incapable of learning? We can change the situation, but it has to be now. Thank you very much.